So in the past I've talked about chromatic dragons and their effect on D&D worlds, but in Dungeons & Dragons there are many other types of, dragon. Most notably, we have metallic dragons, which are slightly less moored in our mythology than their chromatic counterparts, and so have had a slightly smaller cultural impact, at least in the West and in Western-style fantasy. Many good, helpful and noble dragons are seen in East Asian mythology, for example. But in a world where such creatures are real, their impact on society, culture and politics would be extreme. How extreme? Let's figure that out. Firstly, let's establish the main differences between chromatic dragons, which I talk about in this video, and metallic dragons. The most obvious difference is that their bodies are different colours, which would be a useful signifier were it not the best idea in almost any case you see a dragon to run and hide without checking what colour it is. Metallic dragons tend towards good alignments in Dungeons & Dragons, although that should certainly not be misinterpreted as altruistic. This is important to our analysis, but it must also be noted that any dragon can theoretically have any alignment. So this is not quite the moral binary many imagine when reading about these creatures for the first time. Another key feature of the metallic dragons is their ability to change their shape, which is acquired by different stat blocks at different times. The monster manual gives us little help here regarding metallic shape changing. It states that at some point in their lives, metallic dragons gain the ability to assume the form of humanoids and beasts. At some point in their lives. I mean, it's very unclear. It's safe to assume that some metallic dragons get this power younger, and some get it when they're much, much older. But a consensus seems to be in mid to late adulthood, from what we can see from the stat blocks presented to us of the various types of metallic dragon. Speaking of type, metallic dragons often feel slightly more diverse than their chromatic counterparts when it comes to personality, as the chromatics are often regarded as various permutations of bad. We have vile, vain, smart, tyrannical and feral. These could all be theoretically encompassed by one single creature. On the other hand, D&D's design assumes that players are going to fight the bad dragons and perhaps communicate with the good dragons. So our metallic friends get more interesting roleplay notes and personality suggestions. They are so distinctive that I think it's worth saving some time at the end of this video to discuss the individual impacts each of the types of metallic dragon may have on your world building. So stick around for that, but now let's just quickly go through their personality types so we have a better idea of the breadth of metallic dragons. Brass dragons are gregarious and talkative socialites, forcing small talk upon any creature they may meet. They share a breath weapon with their more powerful golden counterparts, but also have a special sleeping breath weapon just to gather a captive audience. Copper dragons are jokesters, regarding wit, bardistry and a damn good punchline above all else. Their foes or detractors may find themselves facing an acidic breath weapon, or simply find themselves slowed and impotent after facing the copper dragon's secondary breath weapon. Bronze dragons love to participate in just wars, and they live by the sea. They can blast a lightning breath at enemy combatants and have the strange ability with their secondary breath weapon to repel individuals away from them. Silver dragons delight in forming alter egos and living among the small folk, read humanoids here. They like to help people, but their enemies may be subjected to a cold breath, or, if they're lucky, a wave of paralysis born straight from the dragon's mouth. Gold dragons are the champions of good. They literally eat treasure and are usually quite serious. Their foes may be burned by fiery flame, or those who might need to be kept alive are weakened as their strength is sapped by the dragon's secondary breath. So how do these dragons shape your world? Well, a metallic dragon must build its hoard. It's basically a biological imperative. Unfortunately, being nominally good, metallic dragons can't simply achieve lots and lots of money by robbing, stealing, pillaging, and threatening civilized folk. So much of a dragon's impact on the world revolves around the way it acquires its hoard. So it's really important to understand some of your world's economic situation before making these decisions. You see, metallic dragons have all of the advantages one could possibly need to get massive amounts of wealth. They operate in the market for hundreds of years at a time as a single entity. They are the most fearsome creditor you will ever meet. And they're able to do all this with any identity they desire due to their shape-changing ability. Yes, it's likely that the savvy and most likely the oldest metallic dragons are true masters of the markets of humanoids. And you don't need an economy that's passed through a financial revolution to have dragons investing in humanoid markets. Speculative merchant expeditions have existed for as long as there's been a market for strange and exotic things. As a dragon, you are in possibly the best possible position to fund a speculative venture. If you're capable of shapeshifting, then you can join the trip as a humble passenger, safeguarding your investment by, being a super powerful dragon in disguise. Even if you're not able to shapeshift, reports of a dragon guarding a caravan would be enough to dissuade most opportunistic bandits. And gold, or my favourite, bronze dragons that have not yet quite earned their shape-shifting rights may still very easily accompany a potential speculative sea voyage, as both are amphibious and can just spend most of the time under the water protecting the boat from nearby. Not only is this a way for a dragon to get out there and see the world, and make friends if they're into that, it also allows them to personally guarantee that their own investments, barring any more powerful creature than a bleeding metallic dragon appearing, can make them guaranteed profits, as long as the speculative expedition is actually a good idea. See, a dragon is able to gamble on the highest risk and potentially the highest reward expeditions that most sensible non-draconic investors would laugh out of a room. All they need to do is protect it and their investment will pay dividends. And they'd get a reputation as an excellent trader, investor, and financier. All of a sudden, humanoids will be begging to put their funds under the talons of this genius investor. And thus the dragon essentially becomes a hedge fund manager with very little work except reputation and guaranteed investment success. Heck, even if a dragon's investment persona, company or bank becomes associated with their draconic form as allies or potentially one and the same, that's not the end. Being in the shadows is definitely preferable, as a dragon's primary purpose is to protect its hoard, and the more people that know there is a dragon and therefore a hoard in the area, the more risk the dragon takes on. But a dragon who is, in this way, exposed as such, may find themselves in a different kind of business. A protection business. See, it doesn't even need to be a malicious protection racket. A dragon's favour is very hard to come by, and buying it is a solid choice if you feel like you're under any threat. After all, this dragon will have a history of managing money effectively and stopping threats. Dragons, being able to grow to incredibly old ages, are essentially the ideal creature to manage wealth long term, especially intergenerational wealth. And as an added bonus, if that dragon has a few hustles running or always makes good on its investments because of the aforementioned dragon thing, then there's a chance that your money, if it is kept with a dragon's banking prowess, will simply keep increasing in value. Investors the world over have heard the old adage that time in the market beats timing the market. And it stands to reason that over their long lives and interest in acquiring money, a metallic dragon is going to have at least backed one very successful investment. Although it might be a very interesting idea to explore if you have the world's least lucky trading dragon. Especially if in a high magic society that dragon's trade decisions are made public. But seriously, imagine the obscene wealth of the dragon that got in on the ground floor of steel in his youth. The older dragons get, they don't necessarily get more intelligent, but with such a vast historic portfolio of assets, it only takes one to go incredibly well for that dragon to be set for life. Of course, all this only works if the dragon is intelligent and well organised, which not all are. More short-term plans may include guarding or dominating one particular trade route, either demanding tribute from any merchant, traveller or army that passes along it, or simply investing in a merchant company that uses this trade route most often. Heck, a metallic dragon is actually the perfect person to run a merchant's guild. Check out my video on guilds and guild structures for a little more detail on that. But it's safe to say that they have local knowledge in spades, a very long-term mindset, and the ability to guarantee safety in a pinch. Another way a metallic dragon may accidentally stumble into becoming a bank is by giving a financial loan to a country. Again, this would mostly be an option for the less scatterbrained dragons, but is an excellent short-term decision that has massive long-term benefits. One truth of almost every fantasy world, and indeed our own real world, is that wars are constant, and wars are expensive. It was not uncommon during the medieval period for nations to be borrowing money from creditors or banks to pay for their next campaign. And any dragon willing to take that initial financial hit of funding a nation's war effort may find themselves owed money and earning interest for generations to come. Even if a nation loses a war, they tend not to be wiped off the map. Their lands are sometimes divvied up amongst the victors, but unless the country is utterly decimated, they still must pay their debts. Besides, a weakened country that can't pay a dragon, it may well be liable to being completely taken over by said dragon. Oftentimes, a weakened nation will still have to find a way to pay its creditors, so will often cut off pieces of its own land and divvy up other resources just to make sure they're not completely losing everything. And, as mentioned before, a dragon is one heck of a collections agent. So even if your metallic dragons don't want to put in the work to win the war on their own, they can still make an absolute killing, even if the nation loses, and may find themselves quicker than you might expect becoming landed gentry as the kingdom hemorrhages land to try and keep their creditors happy. Indeed, many metallic dragons may seek to gain land from countries that seem to claim territories nearby or even within the dragon's own claimed territory. This would have the effect of strengthening the dragon's territorial claim while legitimising their ownership of the region. After all, one of the best ways to keep money-hungry folks away is to have an entire local economy dependent on keeping people away from stealing your stuff. When adventurers turn up in town and ask if there's any dragons or hordes around, if the answer they get is no, then you're safe for another few years. If you own land in both a draconic law sense and a humanoid law, you are doubly able to determine exactly what happens there, not only by asserting your own might, but through legal proceedings. Nobody's building a castle nearby your secret fortress if you own that land in the humanoid realm as well. However, of course, there are downsides to metallic dragons being more involved necessarily in humanoid affairs. The first stock markets were essentially among rich enthusiasts for certain commodities. Dragons would most likely have their own markets even before humans considered that as an option. But that does mean that dragons would probably be the first to learn the lesson of a massive stock commodity bubble bursting. It is likely that draconic markets, being a little more advanced than humanoid markets, would have already experienced the bursting of a bubble, which has probably had the effect of bankrupting a fair few of the dragons that partook in it, and making others obscenely wealthy. This draconic wealth disparity might play a role in your world's politics, especially if this particular market bubble has popped recently. Metallic dragons may be more aggressive, more willing to walk the streets of the humanoids, or maybe even start fighting in amongst themselves. After all, the tulip buyers of Amsterdam didn't have hundreds of pounds worth of muscle, scales, and draconic power behind their calls for fairness and a restructuring of wealth. Another reality of managing a hoard as a financial burden is that wealth management is quite literally a full-time job. Dragons are often regarded as work-shy, would be a kind way of putting it, and as such may be averse to the myriad things that need doing, especially when trading in humanoid markets as well as draconic ones. You see, no dragon wants to really spend a lot of money on an accountant to keep all their affairs in order, so those that can't afford to do so or refuse to do so must simply manage their hoard themselves, which, for non-professionals, may prove tricky. Another simple fact that needs considering in your world building, and this isn't really to do with money, this is to do with the metallic dragon's population. You see, good dragons often find themselves seeking evil creatures to slay. Plus, they tend to get into fights a lot with bad dragons as well. And, of course, the giants who attack all dragons. And metallic dragons are more likely to be involved with humanoids, drawn into their conflicts and having to help out with their problems. This essentially means that metallic dragons have 2 to 3 times the chances to die in combat or otherwise than chromatic dragons do. This may severely negatively impact the numbers of metallic dragons in your world, which can serve as an explanation for why dragons haven't completely destabilised every world economy with their strange draconic stock market. But let's now just talk about the different types of dragons and what each of them means to your world, and I'm going to do this fairly quickly, so do keep up. Brass dragons live in arid climates and are incredibly talkative. This may mean that intelligent monsters avoid brass dragons like the plague. They are quite literally a manticore's worst nightmare. Imagine, if you will, a manticore pinned under the talons of a brass dragon, forced to engage in small talk because it's one of the only creatures that can in the entire region. A brass dragon would be incredibly infuriating, not just because it is more powerful than most of the intelligent creatures around, but because it won't shut up. Living in deserts and such like, it is likely that a brass dragon that claims territory probably controls or knows of every single oasis in its land. They may indeed sometimes lead travellers there, as they are known to produce magical footprints, guiding travellers to safety. But the problem with being a parched traveller accepted into a brass dragon's oasis is that there will be an expectation for you to converse. Perhaps if the brass dragon is feeling particularly cruel, to converse before any water is had. Customs may emerge in the deserts surrounding brass dragons. Treasure buried in the sand is just blanket assumed, claimed already. And normal traveller advice may be to travel with a damn good tale or two in the chamber, just in case you need water, and a brass dragon will not let you have it until you tell them a good tale. And just in case, advice to travellers may not be quite simply to hunker down and try and survive in a sandstorm that has robbed you of all of your supplies, but perhaps make yourself visible, at least from the air. Who knows, maybe in a region with a brass dragon, it may deign to help or guide you to safety. For the price of a bit of a hobnob. Copper dragons are the most interested in humanoid art, speech and literature. Perhaps your oldest epic poems are actually written in the Draconic tongue. Perhaps Draconic is actually a bard's second language in your world, just because these copper dragons have been patrons for so long. Copper dragons would be the best friends of sphinxes. They would share notes on their favourite riddles. Riddle books are probably not even written in the sphinx's own language. They're most likely written in Draconic as well, because the copper dragons are the ones compiling these lists, and the bards they adopt into their hordes may well be the ones forced to write it down. See, a copper dragon would never be able to resist the image of a sphinx standing on a cliff top, barking riddles down at nearby travellers. Copper dragons are likely known for kidnapping bards and probably not paying them. They're known to be incredibly miserly. They're jealous guardians of gold who will also get annoyed if you don't entertain them. It's honestly likely that most civilizations have about as much time for copper dragons as they do for chromatic dragons. Travelling bards may even need to have dragon insurance to pay their ransoms in case they are kidnapped by a particular copper taken with their ability to weave words. The biggest insurance funds, of course, would be owned by copper dragons themselves. They know themselves better than anyone else, of course. More upstanding copper dragons are likely behind artist communes, and maybe protectors of certain cities who prize the arts highly. They may mingle around such cities, havens for artistry and bardistry, in their shape-changed form, and it is possible that copper dragons themselves are some of the worst performers in the commune. After all, A copper dragon will likely have never had a fair critique that was free from flattery or self-preservation instincts. Unless, of course, they've found a very good and very honest Sphinx friend. Bronzes are my absolute favourite type of metallic dragon, perhaps my favourite type of dragon in D&D. They would often disguise themselves as fishermen or be friends to fishermen, and of course be friends to the myriad creatures of the water where they live on coastal regions. Merfolk, Selkies may find themselves visited by a curious bronze dragon who may protect them against the surface dwellers, if they ever need its help. They may be fierce and bitter rivals of dragon turtles, another very fun monster, and due to their proclivity of getting involved in the wars of men, tactics may have developed that are pretty brutal with a bronze dragon. You see, lightning and metal armour doesn't mix very kindly, and bronzes are known for their lightning breath. Indeed, nations that may know that a bronze claims its territory nearby may in fact steer wars towards the bronze dragon, as they have a reputation for at least hearing out both sides and deciding upon which side is the justice and which side the bronze dragon will lend its aid. They are not averse to participating in human wars, and any kingdom that thinks they have a just claim for some war that they may be waging would certainly seek such a creature out. Of course, 50% of the time, they'll be on the wrong side. But it doesn't stop the allure of having a bronze on your side, especially with that aforementioned unpleasantness of wearing metal armour in a region of lightning. Silver dragons are most likely among the metallic dragons to disguise themselves as adventurers. They may in fact even be the originators behind the concept of an adventurers guild video. They like to hoard history, so kingdoms in dire straits may actually sell their old relics and histories. Bodies of kings, ancient chalices that are ritually used hundreds of years ago but have fallen out of fashion in hard times. Silver dragons are the most likely to become monarchs and or rulers, as their interest in people draws them to civilization. It's not the golds that are most likely to pose as a ruler or become a ruler of a space. It is really the silvers based on their personality. If a silver exists on a wild frontier that humanoids are trying to break into with an outpost civilization, then the silver would most likely become a friend of that civilization and clear the way for the rapid expansion. They may provide the security necessary to hold frontier forts if, of course, they're on your side. And the presence of a silver dragon would likely encourage humanoid inhabitation, although it must be noted that the moment that silver dragon dies and there are towns nearby the lair, that is almost the worst place to be in the world. After all, a lair nearby some fairly prosperous towns of happy-go-lucky folk and an abandoned hoard would be a ripe reward for the taking for any chromatic dragon that wanted some new subjects. Any city prospering under the protection of a nearby silver dragon should really be prepared for when that protection runs out. Due to their long lifespans, their proclivity for shape-changing into humanoid circles, and their canonical forgetfulness when it comes to obligations after a certain point, it's likely that any old enough silver dragon will have a trail of bitter octogenarians asking after them, and be a missing person in at least one investigation. Perhaps they are the nearly eternal advisor to a nation's royal line, and return after taking a short personal break to find an entirely new regime in place, being absolutely lost. Strangely, as I mentioned earlier, gold dragons are explicitly and clearly noted in 5th edition to have a preferred diet of gems and pearls. They can apparently eat literally anything. This makes them the only dragon we've discussed who isn't a pure carnivore, which has a massive impact on your world building. See, other metallic dragons could be understood as somewhat similar to good vampires in fantasy. They do their best not to hurt creatures, but their very nature forces them to consume. Most metallic dragons would probably prefer to hunt and eat evil creatures, but would probably make do with wild animals or livestock in a pinch. This may be a problem if they choose to dwell disguised in a city. There's simply not enough livestock available to maintain a large dragon's appetite if they're always stuck in city walls. For a gold dragon, this is no issue. Golds are thus likely the most static of the metallic dragons, both from a personality and a locality perspective. They are described as aloof and grim, so we can assume a seriousness beyond their more whimsical counterparts, and of course a regal countenance, regardless of what disguise they choose to wear. The fact that wealth sustains every single aspect of a gold dragon's existence, from needs to wants, would mean that gold dragons are probably the most serious about acquiring and maintaining liquid capital. They are the most likely dragons of all to keep a bank, and while they may not usually be considered evil, their unyielding seriousness and eternal opposition to evil itself may result in a bank that is built on the money of the honourable, maintained by the corpses of those the dragon judges to be evil. In this way, a gold dragon may easily become revered as a deity of justice, or in other circles, hated and detested as a staunch opponent of corruption and doing things the easy way. When the strongest dragon we have thus far discussed has a strict moral code, it's nigh unstoppable in passing judgment on those below it. A gold dragon who sets themselves in a position of power would most likely utterly destroy most political systems, leading to massive instability. Imagine a paladin who decides that any noble who is in any way corrupt doesn't deserve to rule or own anything. Now imagine that that paladin is also a golden winged beast who can shapeshift at will and is the strongest of any of the base D&D dragons. Yeah. So that's metallic dragons. I know I've talked for far longer than I should have, but I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into what the reality of a metallic dragon means for your D&D world. I hope you've at least gained some inspiration as to things you can use in your game, and some plot lines that may be actually born of reasonable world building as opposed to needing a quest for next week's game. If I have, or if you'd like to see something more in this vein, or if you'd like to see me tackle gem dragons or any of the other dragons in Fizban's treasury, I would love to hear from you. If I've said anything that's a little out of place, let me know in the comments. I love hearing from you, and I love learning from you. I hope the same is true in some way, reciprocally. In any case, with that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.